everyone, Chris Carter here in the North Shore Drive podcast. It's Friday, which means it's day 2 of the NFL draft after the Steelers have selected Derrick Harmon, Oregon defensive lineman, in the first round. I've got Brian Batko on. We're going to talk about what was the big impact of the pick. Was it the right move? How we slotted into things? And we'll also look at why the Steelers didn't go at quarterback with Shedeur Sanders sitting right there, what other quarterbacks could be available on day 2 of the draft, and a look at all the picks that could be available at day 2, where we see things playing out all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We are your Steelers writers. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes Thursday episodes, apparently, of the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only will they help you if you're injured in an accident, they'll also help you fight for your workers' compensation rights. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Brian, the pick was in. They went with Derrick Harmon. The other D tackles were off the board, but you, sir, you and Ray Fittipaldo got it right. Me and Jerry got it wrong. We said Kenneth Grant. He went 13 to the Dolphins. Brian, do you care to beat your chest right now? Do the LeBron dance as you get your mock draft pick right?
Not really, because there's always a lot that goes into it. For all we know, you and Jerry could be right in the sense that the Steelers had Kenneth Grant higher on their board than Derrick Harmon. Of course, they will never admit that, but that kind of is baked into, the whole mock draft industrial complex and trying to make these predictions. Is it's not just about who the Steelers like the most, but it's also trying to triangulate who's going to be there and trades up and trades down. So I had kind of locked in on Harmon a long time ago, post free agency, I guess I should say, just because he seemed like the most likely player to slip out of the top 20 among those top 4 defensive linemen, other than maybe Walter Nolen. But, Nolen was a guy who, if teams could look past some of the anonymous reports on him and whatnot, then, we knew he had the talent to be a top 20 pick or even higher than that. And Harmon I think people have been saying it since the end of last season, since he declared for the draft, since people started studying the top defensive linemen in this draft. He just looks like the type of player that the Steelers gravitate to, or the Ravens gravitate to, those classic odd front 5-3 technique type of guys. He's pretty much built in a lab to be the next Cam Heyward or Stephon Tuitt. And now we'll see if he can do it. It's going to be, really fascinating to see if he can take that torch from Cam Heyward, be the bridge, and kind of, set the Steelers up for the next generation of having a big-time game wrecker on the defensive line, because Cam's been doing it for a long time.
To your point, I went and looked up the relative athletic scores. Neither of them had relative athletic scores, so they didn't have enough. But you look at just the measurements of these guys in where Cam Heyward was.
Eerily similar.
6'4" and 4/8 for Derrick Harmon as far as height, 6'4" and 5/8 for Cam Heyward, so just a tad taller. Derrick Harmon heavier at 313, Cam Heyward was 294. Hand size, I think Derrick Harmon just an eighth larger than Cam Heyward, and arm length just like about a 10th larger than Cam Heyward. So when you're looking at measurements that close, that is very much like a clone of each other. And you look at the experience Derrick Harmon brings. I also think you look at the manner he carries himself. Like when we talked to him at the combine, he gave the most full out responses as far as what he's focusing on. He also talked about being ready to play anywhere from the 0 to the 5. I got the sense that this Derrick Harmon dude, when Mike Tomlin said that this is a Steeler pick and this is very much that, I'm right with you. This is exactly who they're looking for, the type of guy that they want in their room. And I think that this is a win for the Steelers if you look at needs meeting opportunity in the draft. I had Derrick Harmon as the 13th best player on my big board, so getting 13 at 21, pretty good value there. I did have Kenneth Grant higher than him at 12, but Kenneth Grant going at 13 to the Miami Dolphins. that kind of, I think he's a pretty good player. It makes sense. Walter Nolen going later was also an interesting play there, and so I think he's going to Arizona.
Yeah.
So you got that going on. I think for the Steelers, I do wonder this though, Brian, because a lot of people, including us, wondered if they would be able to trade back if Grant and Nolen are sitting there at 21 with Harmon. Do you think they trade back, or do you think they just take their guy like they did last night?
I tend to think they would not have traded back, partly because of what they said publicly after the pick, but also just because they haven't done that in so long. I mean, that's just doesn't seem to be an organizational philosophy of the Steelers to trade down for whatever reason. So, I mean, I think Omar Khan is maybe a little bit more analytical minded GM than, say, Kevin Colbert was during his time here. But yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for. And Mike Tomlin has said this too, and I think it's kind of interesting to look at how different front offices operate. Mike Tomlin said, I think on Tuesday, that they feel so confident in the pre-draft prep that they do and all the homework that they get done on these guys between Mobile and the Combine and the 30 visits that they tend to stick and pick because they're going to have a conviction in somebody. Now, I've heard some of the more newfangled front offices in the NFL talking about trying to avoid the personal biases of meeting with players and, quote unquote, falling in love with a player. And I think that, regardless of which strategy or line of thinking you agree with, I think the second one probably lends itself more to, okay, we're operating as if we've got a spreadsheet here and value rankings, and we can trade down, and we're not so attached to this player who we've spent a bunch of time learning about and, crunching the tape and projecting him in our defense. So I think those are two different schools of thought. And, regardless of which one is right or wrong, I think that because the Steelers approach the draft the way that they do, and Mike Tomlin's such a admitted junkie for this kind of stuff, player acquisition, that's why they tend to not really play those trade back games for the most part.
I'm right with you. Like, I think that's, and again, it's about getting the player that you envision and making sure you're getting real first round talent. Trading back is always something that's nice if you think you can recoup something, and if you got some other things in mind later in the draft, and maybe they do. Maybe I'm sure that there are guys that they look at like, man, we could really use that second round pick. But again, they went and traded for DK Metcalf. They got a playmaker wide receiver in the room, and I still think they keep George Pickens right now, so that they have a 1-2 punch there. I'm right with you. I think that them not trading back shows they believed in Derrick Harmon the whole way. I think this is a big move for the Steelers as far as getting that guy, and as far as what Derrick Harmon brings to the table, Brian. I think he's going to get action very quickly for the Steelers. Like, I don't think he's going to be like, he won't be a starter per se, but like I think he's going to be the first D tackle off the bench, and like the first D tackle off the bench it gets a lot of snaps in games, especially with this. They rotate a lot, especially I think in the nickel. You're going to see him in that second platoon of guys, maybe with Equale, who you had on Chip Hammond football the other week. I think that's he's going to be useful right away to the Steelers. And if the pass rushing skills that he showed at Oregon can translate quickly into the NFL, he had 55 pressures last year in college football. That was the most of any interior defensive lineman. If he can translate that to help the Steelers right away as a defensive line, that could go a long way to making sure he's not just involved, but he's an important part of the defense.
Yeah, I think if they open week 1 against the Ravens and Derrick Henry's lining up out there, then maybe they come out in their 3-4 base defense and he is a starter, and Keeanu Benton is at the nose tackle position. So I mean, I think that's the beauty of Harmon is his versatility. You're going to be able to use him as, the nominal defensive end. When you're in that defense, you're going to be able to use him in all the sub packages, really, because he isn't just a big old run stuffer, 2-gapper, plugging up the middle type of guy. So I do also, to go back to our previous discussion, Chris, you mentioned, like, if the board had fallen differently, would the Steelers have traded down, or should the Steelers have traded down? Do you think they could have traded back and still landed Harmon? Because, you look at the teams that pick next, Omarion Hampton to the Chargers, Matthew Golden to the Packers. Donovan Jaxson to the Vikings. And then you saw the Giants come up with the Rams to take Jaxson Dart. So, like, could the Steelers have gotten, when Omar Khan said the phone was ringing, was Joe Shane from the Giants one of those GMs calling? Was he trying to move up?
Right.
You sort of wonder, who did the Giants even move up in front of to take a quarterback at that stage in the draft? Then the very next pick, we were all kind of, we were doing all the Derrick Harmon talk at this juncture of the draft, but the Falcons made what a lot of people think was kind of a head-scratching move to trade up with the Rams. Excuse me, the Giants traded up to the Texan spot, but the Falcons trade up to the Rams and take another edge rusher in James Pierce Jr. Would they have, traded up still and grabbed Harmon? Would the Ravens have grabbed Harmon at 27 overall? Seems like they and the Steelers are always fishing in a lot of the same ponds. So just some food for thought. And then lastly, 28th overall, the Lions made probably the most surprising first-round pick, but the Lions front office has made a habit of this in recent years. Of they don't follow kind of these consensus media big boards. They took Tyleik Williams, defensive lineman from Ohio State. So maybe that tells you they also would have been a team interested in grabbing who would have been a hometown pick for them, Derrick Harmon from Detroit.
Yeah, that would have been pretty crazy. I do think that that's the thing. The only way I see them trading back is if they saw all three of those guys there, because then I think they would have said, like, look, we can get one of these three guys and we'd be happy with any of them. But I think that they're happy with Harmon. It's like one of those things where you don't mess with when you get what you want, you don't mess with the past. And so you try to move forward and stay focused on what you can do next. That's what they got to do in this third round. What were you going to say there, Brian?
So do you think the pre-draft visits with Nick Eamon-Worry, Omarion Hampton, Matthew Golden, Shamar Stewart were sort of backup plan approaches from the Steelers if Grant, Nolen, and Harmon had all been gone?
I think these were all guys that they thought could be available in the first round, and they wanted to make sure, would this be one of those guys that Omar Khan says they would not trade out of? And who knows? Maybe Matthew Golden was, because he went right after their pick. Maybe Omar, both of them, Hampton and Golden, both went right after the Steelers pick, and so maybe they would have been that guy. Maybe they wouldn't have been. Who knows? But to your point, like I think that I think the Steelers got their guy, so they don't need to talk about trading back or anything like that. You take your guy, you roll with him, and now you start to develop him moving forward. But the guy that a lot of people in Pittsburgh were wondering if, a lot of people nationally were wondering if the Steelers would take, and even thought the Steelers would take, was Shedeur Sanders. And Shedeur Sanders is still sitting there waiting for a phone call as day two gets ready to ramp back up tonight. I want to talk about not taking Shedeur Sanders with Brian and what the quarterback situation looks like moving forward. Who else could be picked there if not Shedeur Sanders on day two of the draft? Here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also does workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatments are over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? Probably not great. Well,
Terrible.
Exactly, it's terrible because you don't know, they're not on your side, so you need someone on your side. To get someone on your side, call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for your workers' compensation rights that you deserve with every fiber there being. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Edgar Snyder and Associates. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Brian Batko. Brian, the Steelers don't go Shedeur Sanders. People in national media everywhere were astounded. Locally, we were all kind of like, that's what we thought would happen. But is this a mistake? Because there's some people saying like this, every team that passed on him is going to regret passing on Shedeur Sanders, this, that, and the third. But clearly the Steelers weren't alone in thinking that he wasn't a first-round quarterback because no one took him in the first round.
I think Shedeur, you can't really separate him from the hype train, the Coach Prime stuff. If you could, be a different conversation, but because you can't, and because there's going to be a microscope on him wherever he goes, and the amount of media at your practices and at your training camp and in your locker room is going to grow exponentially,
Mm.
that makes it a tougher sell, I think, to take a chance on him in the first round. You've got to have a team, front office, coaching staff, all of that, assistants who are comfortable both with him as, purely as a player and a prospect between the white lines, and comfortable with everything that's going to accompany him to the league. So it's made him a lot of money so far through NIL and whatnot and endorsements. It may have cost him some money last night, but hey, you read like the anonymous scouts and those kind of reports and the rumblings in the pre-draft process. You had the curmudgeon saying if his name wasn't Sanders, he'd be a 3rd round pick or later. So yeah, I came out of Tuesday's pre-draft press conference down on the South Side with Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan thinking that was a little odd that he went so into detail about him. He could have easily, and I know some people are like, well, it was the only player he was asked about. I get that. But Mike Tomlin could have easily said, we're never going to discuss individuals. We're going through the pre-draft process like we always do. We've met with a lot of guys. We're not going to talk about any one player. But he didn't do that. We know he did expand, which was uncommon for him. So I came out of Tuesday thinking they either love Shedeur and they are going to take him and they're kind of priming everybody for what's about to come, or this is a total red herring and they aren't going that way at all. And I was leaning toward the latter, and I guess I'm glad I was now, seeing how it all played out.
Yeah, I think that's the thing here is that I just also remind people that, like, look, it's not like, for me, it's not even about the whole Shedeur and his flashiness and his cockiness and his watch and his swagger and his dad. None of that matters to me when it comes to this decision. Now, maybe that matters to some other people, but to me, it was purely about on-field stuff. Like when it comes to with the quarterback position, when you look at what he does, he has accuracy at a high level. His throwing motion is very consistent. When he wants to put the ball somewhere, he puts it somewhere. That's really impressive. But everything else is a question mark. His height, not what you want in the NFL. His speed, not what you want in the NFL. Arm strength, not great, not terrible, but he doesn't have that kind of arm that he can fire a rope for 30, 40 yards and he get there. He kind of has to put things on the arc. Now, again, he has the accuracy to get it there, and I think he'd be fine for a 2nd round pick. But a 1st round pick, I felt this would have been a mistake if the Steelers had gone with him, because he has so many boxes left to check to get there as a quarterback. And the Steelers, and again, there's some things you can't change your height, and really you most likely can't change your arm strength, and you most likely can't change your speed unless you're out of shape. And I don't think he's out of shape, so I think that's his natural limitations. So I say all that to say I think that this was the right move by the Steelers to pass on him, and clearly, because now he's still available on day 2. But I am interested to see who makes the move for him. Will Cleveland get back in the game for him? That could be all those types of things I think are still on the table.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, it's going to take a certain appetite for Shedeur, because I know you said it's purely about the prospect, but that's never the case with teams when they make these picks. Like you do have to factor in, okay, how's this guy going to handle the expectations? How's he going to, fit in with the locker room? And that's doubly a factor with a quarterback, and especially one who does think pretty highly of himself and had the quote at the combine about, if you want to change your franchise, pick me. That's bold. And, he has sort of earned the right to say that with the success he's had at the college level. But how did that square with coming in here and maybe being a backup to a veteran, or even lower potentially on the depth chart, depending on where he goes? He might have been lower than that if he would have landed here in Pittsburgh if Aaron Rodgers signed. So, it's going to be fascinating. And I do feel bad for Shedeur just because, they kept showing the empty couch at his draft party last night. And, I guess I'm happy for him that he decided not to go to Green Bay, because that would have been, another
That's tough.
He'd have been memed out of the out of the world. So, I mean, you just anybody who's widely expected to go in the 1st round and then they slip, you kind of have to have a soft spot for him. But maybe this will work out for him better in the long run. Maybe he'll go to not even just a better situation, but just to have less expectations and hype around him being a 2nd round pick, rather than a franchise investing a 1st round draft resource into him. So We'll see. Jaxson Dart does end up going in the first. Now, I've said many times I still think Shedeur is a slightly better prospect than Dart, but the Giants signed up for Dart instead of Sanders, and there's the whole other tier of quarterbacks as well with Jalen Milroe and Tyler Shough. They seem to be the
Yep.
two that have the most buzz to maybe go early here on night 2 of the draft, and then I wonder, where will Will Howard and Quinn Ewers end up as well.
Yep, lots of big questions still at quarterback, but let's look at overall what could be available for the Steelers at 83. They still have a long way to go. Just under 80 picks as far as where are not 80 picks, 50 picks before they pick again. We'll talk about what they're looking at here next on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, remind you the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. April is Stress Awareness Month, and studies show that doing even one group exercise class a week can significantly reduce stress. There's no better time to move your body and rest and reset your mind than at UFC Gym right now. However you blow off steam, they've got it. They've got boxing, kickboxing, Zumba, MMA, HIIT, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, muscle makeover, spin, yoga, cardio core, bar, youth classes, and super sneakers. Ready to feel stronger inside and out? Drop in this week at UFC Gym, Market Square, or the Waterfront to try a class for free. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's look at guys who are still available and could actually be available in the third round. I'll tell you this: the most surprising. I'll give you my most surprising player. Let me know if it's surprised. I am really surprised Will Johnson didn't get picked. I know that he has injury questions, but man, I just think that is a huge prospect who's just still on the board.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly makes you wonder, like, is there something else going on too with his personality or his attitude that turned teams off? Because I thought he was one of the top 10 prospects maybe in this draft, and it seemed like things checked out for him okay medically. But yeah, I was stunned to see him fall out. Not so much Mike Green, the edge rusher from Marshall, because he did have some assault allegations on his record that that's tough to overlook for teams, even if they vet him and he claims there's nothing to it. I mean, that's not good. That's how you fall out of the first round. Luther Burden from Missouri, back way back a couple months ago when it seemed like the Steelers might be circling around potential round 1 wide receivers. Looked at him a lot, and he ultimately doesn't get picked either. And Nick Eamon-Warry, pre-draft visitor with the workout of the combine at safety from South Carolina. He slips out entirely. So those are the big ones to me. And I mean, we'll see where this goes tonight on the running back front. I guess you could consider it a pretty successful first round if you're the Steelers and you're looking for the trickle down effect. TreVeyon Henderson did not sneak in there, so now you've got him still on the board. Quinshon Judkins, Kaleb Johnson from Iowa. It's still playing into this deep running backs class for the teams that want one.
I think it does too. I really look at what these all the running backs they brought in and think, man, like that after that 50th overall pick, the Steelers are probably going to be looking real close. Like, all right, what they're lining people up. Who do they want to get the opportunity? I think it'd be a unique chance for the Steelers if they were to get a really good running back to pair with Jaylen Warren long term, who is more explosive, and they kind of feed off each other's energy a lot more.
Yeah. Do you think the Steelers, Chris, do you think they are going to prioritize, if he's there, if Tyler Shough is there, let's say Tyler Shough and Jalen Milroe are both there. They're very different. They're pretty much on opposite ends of the QB spectrum in this class, because Shough is probably the most pro ready. Jalen Milroe has probably got the longest to go to become an NFL caliber starting quarterback. Do you think it would make more sense for them to take somebody like Shough and say, okay, maybe he's going to get a whack at this thing in 2025,
because
and we'll see what we have.
Already.
Or somebody like Milroe, and you're kind of like, all right, he's a total project, and we won't really factor him in one way or the other for our quarterback position for the future, but we'll try to work with him and develop him, and maybe he's an asset.
I think total project, because if you're drafting a project, you want that project to have the upside of paying off, right? And if they don't, that's a problem. So I'm with you on that. I think there's something else that can happen here. But I look at the running back position and I think, man, like there's going to be so many good players in this draft class, and they're going to start pouring into the second and third rounds. People are going to start taking them. I just wonder, when is that run at running back going to happen? Because that's what happens, is that teams hear other teams getting into it and they're thinking, okay, we gotta make sure that we're getting ready to counter what they're doing, jump ahead of the Steelers, because they probably want a running back here, and the Steelers want to trade up. That's what they want to do. Let's try to fleece them as much as we can. Having that awareness of where other teams go also is a big part of scouting. You're not just scouting yourself. You're not just scouting your prospects. You're scouting other teams to see what they're looking at there, so you can form your strategies around that.
There's going to be more running backs available. Quarterback, not so much, but I mean, I wouldn't hate if they waited and used the day 3 pick, even if it's the 4th rounder, on a Will Howard or Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, even Riley Leonard. I mean, I know he's another guy who people really question, is he actually a quarterback or is he just a good athlete playing quarterback? I think it's worth getting a guy like that on your roster, in the equation there. See what you've got in training camp, and I mean, maybe you're right back to square one, and you're really eyeing a first round quarterback this time next year. But Skylar Thompson doesn't fill me with a whole lot of confidence at the bottom of the depth chart. So, and we know that even if Aaron Rodgers is going to be here, it doesn't hurt to have that developmental QB3. So I think that's still worth the shot on the 3rd day of the draft, even if they don't go that way tonight.
I agree. This is the year where there's a few of those that add up. I think that there's a chance that that 3rd day of the draft could be the sweet spot for quarterback. For as far as you're looking for backup quarterbacks at this stage of the draft, that's fine. So, but I think that the 3rd round, there's still a lot of potential there for a lot of different positions. We'll see what they go with tonight, and if they'll make any trades with those picks at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
I do think Omar Khan's going to make a trade at some point. I think he will. I think he's.
He didn't at all last year, right?
I'm trying to think last year. No, I don't think he did last year. The year before, he maneuvered around to get Darnell Washington, I think it was. So I just feel like because they have sort of their usual pick allotment has been thrown off by the DK deal. Right. I just see him doing something to either, gain a pick, even if it's a late pick, or, work with next year's draft resources too, since they are expecting at least to get, one or more comp picks. So I feel like he's not just going to sit on his hands, but, I didn't predict that in my mock draft. I just have that feeling that he's gonna do something, because he is one of those GMs who loves to look at the trade values, move up and down the board, and I've heard he's pretty calculating in that draft room when the bright lights are on.
Absolutely. We will have the bright lights on tonight. Brian, Jerry, and Ray will be back at the facility. I'll be back at Mike's Beer Bar doing our live stream. Thanks to everyone who joined our live stream last night. We'll be kicking things off again tonight. We're looking to start at 8 because the Steelers picked so late in the 3rd round, but we will be there early before then. And if the Steelers are thinking about trading up, we'll be jumping on the air. So tune in tonight to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's live stream with the NFL draft. Where
Brian, do you have the pick yet, Chris?
It's tough when it's this far out. I mean, we're 50 picks away right now. I've been saying DJ Giddens out of Kansas State. You?
That's a good one. I picked Tyler Shough in my mock, so I guess I'll stick with it. I guess I'll stick with Shough, but he could certainly go higher.
Absolutely. He's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. This is the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks again for tuning in. Tune in tonight on the live stream to see all the different reactions that we have to all the picks and how things shape up for the Steelers on day 2 of the NFL draft, and read all our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you tonight on the live stream from Mike's Beer Bar.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.